their property, they can take part in the deliberations of 1/4, half, or 3/4 of what their property was. So it wasn't just about how much of property you owned. It wasn't just about owning property. How much of property you owned also gave you certain privileges of how you would decide in the Mahasabha ruling, which meant that people who had a larger stake in the community were allowed to have more powers to take decisions that affected the larger community. Yeah. Those who purchased shares from the original shareholders had to learn and pass an exam of an entire Veda, including the Prasishta of membership for the first category. So this meant that just by me saying that I know how to recite a Veda didn't alone allow me to stand for election. By the way, this is not even for getting a position. It's right about standing for an election. Which meant that educational qualifications was set down. How do you measure those was also set down over there. Those who purchased property or had rights to it by other means were also bound by this agreement. So even if you got into this village because you married into the village and you still wanted to get into the Mahasabha, you had to go by these privileges, these rights. Those who have no full-fledged power, or Shravane, which means listening really, could not be in any of the subcommittees or the Varyams that worked under the Mahasabha of the village. So the way a Mahasabha would work is you would have the main legislature come judiciary, then you'll have multiple subcommittees. All of them will usually have around 5 people. Eri Varyam would be the subcommittee which took care of the waterworks in the village. Ponvaryam would be the subcommittee which looked after the fineness of gold that was deposited into the temple treasury, because remember, everything that we expect from the government today, the temple did for the local community. And tax collection was an important role that the temple had. You would also have caste-based taxes, which also these Varyams would collect. So what kind of Varyams seem to have varied from village to village in the Pallava, Chola and the Pandya times, but they were Varyams definitely. You didn't just have a Mahasabha, you had Varyams underneath, so you got elected to the Mahasabha because of all these qualifications, and from there on you were a part of different subcommittees. Sabha members who frequently obstructed proceedings by casting negative votes were fined 5 coins, 5 kas, 5 kas, probably copper coins, because 5 gold coins would have been a lot of money in the 9th century, but would not lose their rights per this agreement. So what happens in our legislature today is there's a lot of spiel and hyperbole in preventing legislation to happen. They had a check on doing that in the old days. So what we therefore learn from the Manur inscription is that there was a very well-defined system of election for legislature and for the judiciary. Yeah. So many of us think that democracy was a gift that the British gave. Not true at all. We have it much earlier. Number 2, legislature and judiciary work together. Number 3, you didn't get elected into the Mahasabha just because you had money or because you had power. You had to have a lot of other qualifications, and they were tested as well. And these terms are usually for a 2-year term. This is about the Manur inscription. Let's look at Kurivithurai, and I think Shankar mentioned it in the context of some other king. The general conception of the Pandya Empire at that point of time is king equals God, God equals king, so the king is above the rule of law. But one inscription from Kurivithurai gives us a different story. Jatavarman Sri Vallabha in his 9th year and the 33rd day is relevant to this context. So what he has done is, Narayana Bhatta Vajapayi seems to have been a great Brahmin of great educational qualification. He has allowed this Brahmin to dig a separate canal from the Vaigai river called the Sri Vallabha Kal, so which the king has named after himself. This seems like a very straightforward gift. Now what has happened is, because of water being diverted through the Sri Vallabha Kal, water for the lower riparian villages has reduced. So they have gone and protested to the king and said, how could you take a decision of denying or reducing water for us when we have not been informed, when we have not been consulted? In the general sense, the king would be perfectly okay to say that I am the king, I rule the land, I can do whatever I want. But that's not what the Pandya king did. So they were in the 16th year of the king, so they seem to have had a lot of negotiations in between. There's another related inscription where the Sabha members of Cholantak and Chaturvedi Mangalam, who objected to the new canal since it was dug above their existing canal and had presumably reduced their water flow. The inscription indicates that the king revoked his earlier gift and gave the original donor new lands in the northern bank of the Vaigai river, which meant that the rights of these lower riparian canal water owners was actually allowed. And it's inconceivable for us to think of a king who was above the law to actually agree to this because of the welfare of the larger community. So again and again, the point that I'm trying to make through the copper plate engraving and through this, through these two inscriptions so far, is history textbooks usually tell us that the king was above the rule of law, he could do whatever he wanted, but in the scheme of things, it was very clear that the king was very cognizant that his power existed only so long as there were subjects. And he was a king in the context of having people to rule over. And if there were no people and their welfare was not taken care of, there was no point in him being a king. The Velvikudi grant is also an important document in this respect, where we find a case where the king, there was a person who had lost his documentation, and he had petitioned to the king. And the king had a lengthy series of meetings with him, and presumably that man had a lot of witnesses. And at the end of it, the king agreed that the issue was genuine, and he agreed that the earlier written documents were missing, and the king actually returned the gift back to him and gave new documents. So again, the importance of written documentation is very important. The Thirumayam example is the big one that I wanted to focus on, and the agreement is dated on May 7th, 1245, in the reign of Sundara Pandya II. Thirumayam is the photograph of the village here. It's very close to Pudukkottai. It has a Shiva temple and a Vishnu temple. Both of them are very, very ancient antiquity. Cave temples, both of them. And there is a fort on the top, which is where one of Kattabomman's brothers was supposed to have been incarcerated for some time. In just about before 1247, is when there seems to have been a major caste dispute in the village between the Shiva worshippers and the Vishnu worshippers. It was clearly of bloody proportions, because the inscriptions mention that temples were broken, main idols were broken, and broken idols were thrown into water bodies. Blood was on the street. They were actually killing each other. By that time, the local Pandya king had lost a lot of his power. And the Hoysala kings had become more and more prevalent in the region, especially from Srirangam onwards. So the local king couldn't sort this out. The Hoysala king was called, the Hoysala general was called, and in May, on the 7th of May 1245, what he's done is, between the Shiva temple and the Vishnu cave temple, he's drawn a line and erected a wall. If you were a Shaivite on the Vishnu side of the village, you were moved to the other side, and whatever water bodies you had, whatever land you had, Nanja, Punja, whatever it was moved correspondingly. And the entire agreement, listing the minutest details of who moved, where they moved, what was their original property, where was the new property, is all engraved. One copy in the Shiva temple and one copy in the Vishnu temple. And this inscription was seen as so important that an earlier and very important inscription which had musical notes, which fortunately there's a copy of it in Kudumiyamalai, which also talks about the Parivadini instrument. This was partially erased and this inscription was copied out. This is in Thirumayam. So we get a sense of how the power of the king only survived for as long as he was militarily stable. Once he became weak in the military sense of the term, his power and his rule of law started diminishing. So this is in the Manur inscription. Thirumayam. Yeah. Okay. Let's look at land tenure. Now, the biggest economy of that time was, of course, agriculture. So we have many. What is something? Oh, I don't need this light. Okay, it's okay. This is fine. The biggest economy at that time was agriculture. So we have many, many inscriptions around land ownership and irrigation. What we can see as an extract from this is the Pandya irrigation system was completely rainwater fed. So every region, and there are more than 5-6 words that describe an area. So it's not just an area and a pale area or a large lake and a small lake. There are multiple ways in which their descriptions are. That itself tells us that water bodies were important for them, given the sense of vocabulary that they had. All large lakes had at least 4 exits or canals. Each of these canals went on to smaller sized ponds, and from there again there were 4. So this was a large network, and scholars believe, looking at the inscription pattern, and this is a lot of my PhD is around this, looking at the inscription patterns from southern part of Pudukkottai through Virudhunagar, so that connects the Vaigai river, right down to the Tambrabarni Delta, especially Seran Mahadevi, down to Kanyakumari district. The entire region was connected by lakes, ponds, and canals. Not just on one side, but on 4 sides. So you can see the kind of the enormous scope of rainwater harvesting that happened. And all of this was done by the local community. Today, there's a fundamental difference in our mindset. If something is wrong, we expect the government to do it. Only now, slowly, we're talking about self-help groups, right? This you can see in the Pandya period. Very, very clearly, there are inscriptions where the village asks for the king's support in managing this network. And every time the answer is no. You have to look after your water systems yourself. So in towns like Shiviliputtur, we have an inscription which says, in the summer period, when lands are fallow and there's time for people to while away, every able-bodied man who owns land in the village will have to surrender some of his time to desilt the canals and keep this in good repair. We'll find this system. And in fact, some scholars like Thirumalai believe that even looking at the quantity of the grain measurement, that the Pandya measure for grain was actually much larger than the Chola measure itself. And while the Chola country has got a reputation for being always prosperous, right? It is a good chance that the Pandya region was equally prosperous. And when we look at the pattern of inscriptions, what we see both in the Pandya period and when they were occupied by the Cholas, especially Rajendra and Rajaraja, that the core of the Pandya wealth came from the upper reaches of the Tambraparni river. So Seran Mahadevi, Amba Samudram, Veeravanallur, Tirukurungudi, Shivasailam, this region, Brahmadesam, this region seems to be a very, very commercial importance for them. And you will see if you look at it from the map, you will notice that the density of large villages in the upper reaches of Tambraparni is very high. Then in the middle reaches, you have the Navatirupati, so there's some density very close to the river. And then as the river peters down to the bottom, there's not that much of density. But that being said, in Arvarthanagari Sri Vaikuntham, there are inscriptions where, again, when the community meets together to decide on water sharing, they call on lower riparian owners to come and also participate in the meeting. So a lot of transparency in the way the decision is taken, and it's a practical reality because boats from the sea used to come all the way to Arvarthanagari for business. And even today in Arvarthanagari, you have something called the Shangunithure. Shanga is a conch, and you don't find conches in that region of Tambraparni. So there must have been some connection to the trade route for conches being supplied or at least sold or cured from Arvarthanagari and sent through the river of Tambraparni down into the sea. Yeah, so when we have, so going little double clicking into this, we have areas which are small lakes, we have pair areas which are larger lakes. Channels will create square parcels of land. And when they create square parcels of land, they're called sadarams. A sadaram itself will be divided into 20 to 24 padagams. So when land was taxed, the level of accuracy of land taxation was incredible. It was almost 1/300th of an acre. And when the land was taxed, so again, it goes back to the principle of you should be happy, I should be happy. Unless people around us are happy, we will not be happy in the long term. So what the king says is what happens here also. So if one of the padagams was closer to the water source, then the produce of grain is possibly much higher. So that place will be taxed more. If one place is under the tree shade, that place will be taxed like. So it worked in favor of having a farmer who would be taxed very, very fairly. And many times during situations of drought, and you see this many in the Navatirupati inscriptions, many times in times of excessive drought, farmers have gone and complained to the king and said, we can't pay taxes this year, there has been a drought, 2 successive years of drought, and 9 times out of 10 the king has actually said it's okay, tax waiver for the year. There's a lot of empathy towards the king and the rulers, and it wasn't really a harsh ruler who bulldozed his way through the community. So this is something that we can see. So that's about the irrigation methods. In terms of water sharing, rules are very, very complicated, and I don't want to go into the details unless there are civil servants here who've done this kind of thing when they were collectors in those districts. Complex calculations were made on Murai, which meant how many times, what was my right to take the water, and also in terms of Naligai, which was how many hours will I get. So it was both how many days and how many hours. It was both therefore quantity and quality of water. Both of these were taken care of when rights were discussed. So all the time you will find in these lengthy inscriptions of discussions, of course we don't know what the discussions were, but we know what the ruling was. All the time it's about we both have to be happy if we have to be sustainable. Yeah. The Tirukolakudi inscription is an important one. It's a shame that people don't go there. Chettinad has become such a good tourist destination, but it's a shame people don't go there. So I want to actually read this out a little bit because there's a lot of nuance to this. The Tirukolakudi, this is an image of Tirukolakudi. It's in Tirupattur district, not very far off from Karaikudi. The inscription is dated 1296 in the reign of the Pandya king Jatavarman Sundara Pandya, and it gives us an idea of how the tax structure worked when the temple sold land or auctioned land to the local community. Now, why would the temple do this? A running target that temples had and local chieftains had was to increase the income of the king. And the only way you could achieve more and more growth in the king's kingdom was as a minister if you got more revenue, which is very similar to what businesses are today. Yeah? If this new business had to come, the only way it could come is through taxation. And the only way to increase the pool of tax was to build more land into cultivation. One way of doing that was to create new villages. Yeah? Madambakam, for example, close to Tambaram, was a new creation. And you'll have many other places like that. That only the king can do. What could the minister do? The minister would work through the temples to auction unused temple land to local people who will in turn cultivate it, and therefore they would pay a tax back to the temple. So the minister, and the more and more money the minister could accrue like this, the more and more power and prestige he would have. Ministers are also smart people. Many ministers in the Pandya region and in the Chola region, they would also, flattery was a great way to earn a place in the court. So one way you would flatter the king was to institute new festivals. So many of the Brahmotsavams that temples are celebrating today, at least in the Pandya region, if you look at the star with which it starts, it would have been the birth star of the king. So Maravan Sundara Pandyan, for example, is Avittam. And you'll find many inscriptions, many temples in the middle reaches of the Tamraparni, where they have festivals starting with Avittam, and there's a good chance that it would have been started by a minister of his times. So coming back to the Tirukolakudi inscription. The long inscription is in Tamil, and it says that the Maheshwaras, the Sri Rudras, the Deva Kanni. The Deva Kanni are people who are already enjoying rental of property that belongs to the temple. Yeah, they've also been leased out lands by the temple. The temple accountants, all of these people come together for a meeting. Yeah, and they gave some temple land to a Sundara Pandya Narasimha Devan. Now this point, so the inscription just says this. But the underlying philosophy here is again transparency. If a new person was going to be leased land to the temple, then the existing people also need to know what the terms are. So that later on there is no dispute on, hey, you gave that guy a raw deal, you gave me a raw deal, but you've given him a fair deal. So there's complete transparency. Everybody is sitting in the meeting. Yeah, he was allowed to enjoy them, provided he would repair the water sources that had fallen into disuse. Yeah, there was a long time they've fallen into disuse. Clear the jungle for the use, and he will pay a land tax or melvaram to the temple. And one portion of this temple tax will go to the king. The tax was dependent on the crop. It was 1/3 of the produce for thinai, which is foxtail millet, varahu, which is kodo millet, yellu, sesame, paira, lentil, kuruvai, which is a short-term rice crop, karumbu, sugar cane, kolundu, not sure of what that is, karunai, manjal, of course, is turmeric, inji is ginger, sengarinir is lotus, and I'll come back to the lotus in a while. Varai, which is banana. Valuthale is banana tree leaves that was used for eating. So you had bananas for eating and bananas grown for the leaf. What else do we have? Pushani, pumpkins, etc. So there's a long list. There were also trees that he had to plant. Ma, mango, pala, jackfruit. Natta, I'm not sure. Elumicha is lemon, but it may be something else. Maybe a citrus or some Narthanga kind of a thing, because I don't know whether we had lemon in India by that time. Kulaviruli, Nelli, which is gooseberry. Ilupai, which is Maduka longiflora. Ilupai is used for wood and for the oil as well, and a couple of other trees. Now here's the catch. The tax was 1/5 for the crops like coconut, areca, palms. Okay, 1/7 for dry crops according to the yield. So you already have, the man has negotiated not a flat slab rate. He's negotiated a differential slab rate based on the produce and on the crop itself. Yeah, so it's fair on both sides. For land that was brought into cultivation by clearing the jungle, he had to pay 1/10 in the first year, 1/9 in the second year, 1/8 in the third year, 1/7 in the fourth year, and after that a permanent tax of 1/3. So over a period of time, the tax slowly increases. Now, why would he do this? He would do this because in the first few years, when he's planting so many crops, he has to take more effort. And it's unlikely that the land will become cultivable from the first year itself. So this is fair on the person, it is also fair on the temple. So all the time it goes back to both of us have to be happy, and the land itself. So we don't, in traditional Indian or at least Tamil ways of disputes being resolved, we don't have a win-win. This win-win is a very, very Western concept where I should win, you should win. Here it's not just you and me, but it is the land around us. The land does not have a voice, but if we don't take care of the land, it will come back and bite us. So the system can be compared to the SEZ policies of governments today. Yeah, the inscription also specifies that the temple share belongs to the king and can be disposed in his pleasure. So the king keeps his control of the temple land. Yeah, this underlies the God king and temple palace connection, where religion was an emotional force that kings used to connect the community and used to create committed compliance to the king's rule. Apart from this, other income generators for temples, and we have some inscriptions on this from Nanganeri, was the temple ponds. And temple ponds were places where temples could earn a lot of money because they had fishing rights. Yeah. An inscription from a later Pandya king, which has only recently been published, is in Tirukurungudi. I won't go into the details of who the king was because it's a much later period. We're not sure of the king name, but it's in the Pandya country, and I doubt if there are going to be many seminars which focus on the Pandyas, knowing as how popular the Cholas are anyway. Yep. So thank you once more for you guys for doing this. You have something called a Malayar. So there's a mountain, the Malayala Hills, which is very close to Tirukurungudi. There is a mountain river which is seasonal. This mountain river comes down and it joins a Nambiyara at some point of time. It flows only at some point of time. But when it flows, there's a lot of water. So it's in the interest of the farmers to take care of that water. So what somebody has done at some point of time is, in the mountain river when it reaches the plain, he has constructed a long loop, which means the water doesn't empty into the Nambiyar. There is some water that stays in the loop, and presumably he must have had a few shorter canals to irrigate the field. Now, over a period of time, as things happen, this loop, it gets closed over. So a delegation from Tirukurungudi goes all the way to Madurai, which is it must have taken them at least 4 or 5 days to get there, and they find an expert in canals in Madurai, and they bring that man all the way back. This man stays in the village for 3 years. Yeah, he first gets this repaired, and they find that one of the reasons that this canal this loop has got clogged up is because a large boulder has rolled over from the hill and got stuck somewhere. So they break that boulder, which must have been a back-aching job. So they broke that boulder, they desilted it, they planted stones with the Shanga and the Chakram on either side, which claimed ownership to the temple. Yeah. And that man or that expert stayed in the village for at least a year, checked if the system was working, I presumably did a knowledge transfer, and then went back to Tirukurungudi. It's just a 15-line inscription, but so much of information in inscription line. So this is I want to give you a sense of the breadth of inscriptions that are available, rather than going into minute details of many inscriptions like this. So this is your sense of land tenure. Tirumala is one of the best authors you can read. He was a civil servant, and he was a collector as well, so he really went into the depth of it. Phenomenal person. In fact, I think when we speak of Pandya, if we do another seminar, it'll be a good idea to actually talk about 4 or 5 scholars who've contributed to our understanding of this region. And it's tough for them because, see, one thing that we need to understand is we need to have a lot of sympathy for the Pandyas, and it's not because I'm biased. Unless you go and see places like Kovilpatti, Virudhunagar, Thoothukudi, Ramanad, some parts of Pudukkottai, the reaches between, say, Sheranmadevi and Tirunelveli, but not close to the river. It's an arid country. It's really a harsh environment. It's almost like a desert. So in a place like that, a king can't sit and build big temples like Brihadishwara and all that. He doesn't have the time, and he doesn't have the mind space, because what's in that harsh region, there's a lot more of an adversity mindset than a possibility mindset. So the confusion with the Pandyas, and Shankar did a really fab job of putting all of them together so quickly, but the confusion of the Pandyas, if you listen carefully, you would have noticed many times there were at least 4 Pandyas ruling together. So if there was Sri Vallabha, I don't know which Sri Vallabha this is. There are 5 Sri Vallabhas. They didn't have time for Mekirtis and things like that. So which is why Pandya temples are small temples, because they are just meant to be representative for the kings in the local community. You need some place over there. It's like your little puja room in an apartment. If you lived in a 50,000 room bungalow, then you can have a temple in the home. But if you live in a 1,000 square feet apartment, you can't just have more, you can have only a shelf. So because of this, it is hard to come by detailed Pandya inscriptions, because they were constantly on the job, they were constantly in the move, and they had to keep the country together. And the other problem that the Pandyas had, they had a love-hate relationship with the Cholas on the top and with the Sinhala kings on the bottom as well. So a little bit of sympathy due for the Pandyas. But that being said, what few inscriptions we have, there is a lot of information as well. Yeah. So that is about land, tenure, and irrigation. Let's go to the status of women. Not many inscriptions from the Pandya period about Devadasis. And at the time the Pandyas were ruling, the Devadasis were women of letters in the society. They had a very important role, and much of the temple rituals depended on them. So in a way, if you look at the constant interplay of the male energy and the female energy, right? My PhD guide and I are getting into a lot of dispute of how to say this in a thesis, but I can at least say it here. The male energy is the task-focused energy. It's about getting stuff done. Yeah, and this is symbolized in the priests, the male priests, and the processes and the rituals in the temple. Yeah, in balance, you need the female energy of compassion. This was provided either by the goddess shrines or by the Devadasis, because the Devadasis look towards music and dance, which stir the emotion more than they stir the mind. And the Devadasis were a very important part of the Pandya region. We don't have many inscriptions about them, but the few we have really did a great job. Mannarkoil, which is actually a Rajendra Chola temple in the upper reaches of the Tamraparni river and close by Brahmadesam, have several inscriptions on the Devadasis. I'm not going to go into the details, but that's really a Chola period in the Pandya region, and I wanted to stick to the purity of just the Pandya region. But the list of tasks that a Devadasi had to do is an interesting one. So they weren't just dancing women, they did a lot of other things. Husking paddy, carrying the lights, cleaning the rice, cleaning kitchen vessels, bringing water for worship, attending to the decorations, lighting the perpetual lamps, keeping the clothes for the deity clean, holding the fly whisks, the Kumbharati, which is one of the most important tasks that the Devadasi did as a Nitya Sumangli, which is at the end of the procession. When the deity came back to the Adhisthana, they would do the Kumbharati to ward off the evil eye. Then, of course, dance and music, Dhupa and Deepa assistance, and the preparation for that. These were the long list of things that the Devadasis had to do. So they weren't just dancing girls. One interesting information that we have is a tenancy right agreement during the reign of Maravarman Sundara Pandya, where they were searching for witnesses. And they found that one of the most credible witnesses in the village was a Padiliyar and a Talekulli. A Padiliyar would be a Devadasi who was exclusively dedicated to the temple to sing the hymns of either the Tevaram or the Divya Prabandha. We're not sure of which. And the Talekulli. Now, this is a unique one because generally the belief is Talekulli titles were only given to Devadasis in the Chola period. We have one here. Talekulli is basically a Devadasi who had phenomenal abilities in music and dance, and she was given the right by a king to have a separate lady in front of her who would walk with a staff. The staff would be made of wood, and over the staff would be a gold-covered plate which was inset with a lot of gems and rubies and whatnot. So quite unusual. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, this seems to be the only reference we have to a Talekulli in the Pandya region. The story of in Tirukurungudi is important. Tirukurungudi had a Devadasi who privately funded the construction of a small temple and all the rituals needed For Kallalagar from Thirumalanjole, when he came and stayed in Tirukurungudi for several years when the Muslims had invaded Madurai. So there's a woman who did this on her own. She looked after the Alagar temple, and I don't know whether people in the Alagar temple even know of this status today, but in Tirukurungudi there's still a small shrine where it is believed that the deity resided. What else do we have? During Jatavarman Kulasekara's wife's time, she has given 13 Choran Kase to the Devadasi to take care of a festival, to provide ghee daily for the services. This is probably in Tengasi. So we have instances of the queen trusting Devadasis to and instituting rituals and asking them to take care of the rituals. Usually the practice is for a priest to take care of the rituals. Here it's an unusual case of a Devadasi taking care of the rituals. Suchindram has several inscriptions of Pandya kings and Pandya queens giving gifts to Devadasis for them to take care of rituals and for them to participate in rituals as well. In Mannar Koil and in Tengasi, we have a Devadasi who built temple mandapas and garlands and tanks using her own money to the temple. Now, in this context, very often you will find in the Chola country and in the Pandya region, gifts of kings of lotuses. And it won't be 1 or 2 lotuses, it will usually be in counts of 108 and above. Now, why were they so obsessed with lotuses? The idea is, again, it goes back to irrigation. If I need to cultivate lotuses, and 108 is a large number, I need to have a pond. And if I have a pond, there is greater irrigation facilities in the village. And when there is a lotus, and which means there's a lot more slush, it means that the slush will serve as fertile soil for the farming community. So everywhere it will come back to, I should not be happy, others around us should be happy as well. So that's about the Devadasis. Are we doing on time? Okay, I'll wrap up very soon. Food. We should talk about food. Not many inscriptions on food in Tamil Nadu as a whole, but there are a few in the Pandya region. Yeah. We know, of course, that we know some of the commodities that were sold because of the Alagar Koil inscriptions of Jain monks. Salt was one. Paniyaram is a dish that we have from the Ambasamudram inscription, Kanyakumari inscription of Parakrama Pandya. Now, unfortunately, I think this is the case of people who don't know how to use books who use them, because the page with the reference has been torn from that book in the State ASI library. So I have the inscription, but I don't have the reference, and there seems to be one mistake here. So the list is, for making paniyaram, you need coconut, kadali param, which is bananas, jeera, pepper, chukku, dried ginger, sugar, sugarcane, and orange. But it can't be an orange. It must be some kind of a citrus of some other form. I can't find the inscription, the original reference, but that's a recipe for making paniyaram. And it also tells you how much you have to use of each of those. Ambasamudram has an interesting inscription that teaches you how to make kumayam. This is from the period of Varaguna Pandya, who lived in about the 10th century. Kumayam was a favorite dish even today in the south. Periyarvar refers to it in his Pillai Tamil, when he talks about how Krishna eats kumayam. Then we have Sennal Theetal Arisi, which is Chakra Pongal. Yeah, Sennal Theetal Arisi you need, and the way you make Chakra Pongal in those days is 4 nadis of Sennal Theetal Arisi, Paitru Parupu, which is 1 uri, cow ghee 1 urakku, curds 1 uri, bananas 4 of them, sugar 1 phalam. And the inscription also says, this is also from Ambasamudram, the inscription also says, if you substitute the Payatham Parupu with more sugar, then it becomes Akaradisal. So we have a 2-in-1. Yeah? So yeah, not many inscriptions on food, but a few interesting ones. Food in large numbers, Alagar Koil. We have menu lists, and based on the count of how many kaulis of Vettala was given, there is a belief that in one of the feasts that were eaten, more than 300 people were fed, which in about the 13th, 14th century was a large number of people. We also know that the menu consisted of Puliyodare. I mean, how can a Perumal temple not have Puliyodare? Dudyodhanam, which is Tair Sadam, and you also had Kadamba Sadam, which is Sambar rice of some sort, and Kari Amadu, which is vegetables. So you have all of this list, and there are a few other inscriptions, but these are the key ones. We'll end with poetry. Finding inscriptions of poems is very, very rare. We don't have many of them. Among the Pandya temples, Kudumiyamalai has several inscriptions of poems composed in the Pandya period. We also have many in the Tengasi temple. I'm going to just look at three which have interesting stories. This is from Tiruvallare. Veriyar talava todaishe maran vehundadundrum ariyada sembiyan kaveri naatil aramiyat pariyada toonillai kannanse pattinapalai kandre neriyal vidundun padinaru meyanga nindranave. This is the story around this. Maravarman Sundarapandyan ruled from 1215 to 1239. Most of the Pandya inscriptions are from his time. He is really the person, if you wanted a hero for this seminar for 2 days, it will be him from the Pandya dynasty. His brother or uncle, Jatavarma Kulasekara, was defeated by Kulothunga III. And the story goes that in Madurai, Jatavarma Kulasekara takes his crown and gives it to Kulothunga. And what Kulothunga does is he puts his foot on either the head of the Jatavarman Kulasekara or on the crown of Jatavarman Kulasekara. Yeah, this is only the Pandya version. No? So he does this, and Maravarman must have been a young boy at that time, maybe around 10, 12 years. But obviously this insult is too deep for him. So what he does is when he grows up, he brings the army together and he goes back to the Chola capital. He burns the capital to the ground. He plows the palace with a donkey, and he also plants a seed called kaudi. Kaudi is a seed that will grow up so quickly, it's like a bramble, and in a matter of few months you can't even make out that the building would have been there. And then from doing that he comes to Tiruvallare, which is where he composes the song, where he says, Veriyar talava todeshe maran vegundadundrum, the Pandya king of broad shoulders who was extremely angry, Ariyada Sembiyan Kaveri Naatil Arambayartha. So in this Kaveri delta, Piriyada Thoonillai Kannanche Pattinapalai Palai Kandru, I have not left one official building even to the size of a blade of grass. I have demolished all of them except for this Padinaru Kal Thoon, the 16-pillared Mantapam, because this was given by a Chola king to Urutharankannanar, Kadiyalur Urutharankannanar, in honor of him singing the Pattinapalai. So my reason for this revenge was to tell the Chola kings that if you subdue us and if you torture us, we will torture you back 10 times over. But my enmity is with the Chola king and what he did, it is not with Tamil. So this is the poem. It's still there. Unfortunately, they have not whitewashed it over that. Yeah. Another poem that is worth looking at is in Kudumiyamalai. Then Tennavan Sheyya Peruman Tirumadurai Mannavantan Mal Kaliravallikkum Punni Taravittalai Abayan Kulamadir Talik Mundre Talai Punni Valanadu Panan Per Puruthan Senni Tirumarbir Seyal Titinan Munne Puramavirvar Manchumaka Pubarangatan Taramariyan Meenavar Kontan. This is an inscription where we don't know who the Pandya king was, but it says that in a bitter fight between the Pandyas and the Chola king lost. And what the Pandya king, true to his valor, like a king and like a lion, he took his branding instrument, which had his symbol of the fish, and he branded the heart of the Chola king. So it appears at that time that a king who won the battle was allowed to brand the defeated king just like you would brand cattle. Yeah. The last inscription that I want to end with is from Tenkasi, and it's a poem that was composed by Kulasekara. Vinnadar potrun Tenkasi gopura meedilanga Ennali seida pani ippadi kurayai kidakka Vonnathen kanduyarthitta odengu mundalithan Mannalu Malvan Kulasekara Mannavane. So he says even the celestials come to Tenkasi and praise the beauty of the building that the Pandya kings have built, but it is such a shame that Arikesari could not complete this Gopuram. Seida pani ittapadi kurayai kidakka. Kurayai irundhathu. I built it and I completed it, and therefore I have given completeness to what deserves to be complete. So this organization has taken a small step towards completing one part of the Pandya history that needs completion, which is a seminar like this to share information. And I hope that this will encourage many of you to visit the region, to get to know more about the region. It can, and therefore what Arikesari Kulashekara did for the temple Gopuram, if this seminar and all of you can do for the Pandya history, that would be time well spent. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. சோழ வளநாடில் பிரம்மாண்டமான கோயிலெலாம் வந்து பார்த்துருக்கோம். அதில் எந்த ஆச்சரியமும் இல்லை. ஆனால் ராமநாதபுரம் என்ற வறட்சியின் பிடியில் இருக்கிற பகுதிகளில் கூட கோயில் கட்டி அதை நிர்வகித்த பாண்டியர்களை பற்றி கரெக்டாக பிரதீப் செய்தி சொன்னார். ரொம்ப சந்தோஷம் சார். தமிழ் பாரம்பரிய அறக்கட்டளை சார்பாக நினைவு பரிசு வழங்கி கௌரவிக்க திரு T.S. சுப்பிரமணியன் அவர்களை அழைக்கிறோம்.
Thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present the gift to Mr. Pradeep Chakravarti. Just want to appreciate the wonderful job that the organizers are doing for the past 11 years. ரொம்ப பிரமாதமாக நடத்துகிறாங்க. பேச்சு கச்சேரி நல்ல ஸ்காலர்ஸ்லாம் வராங்க. நல்ல சுயநலமில்லாத கோபு பத்ரி எல்லாருமே பண்ணுறாங்க. அரவிந்த் எல்லாரும் ரொம்ப பிரமாதமாக பண்ணுறாங்க. இது பார்க்கறதுக்கு ரொம்ப சந்தோஷமாக இருக்குது. அண்ட் அமோகமான பேர் நான் வந்து இதில் கலந்துக்கிறாங்க. அண்டு எல்லா லெக்சரும் they are of high order of scholarship, absolute erudition. They are doing wonderful work year after year. ஒரு நல்ல young band is doing wonderful work. I want to thank them really for doing this great work headed by Professor Swaminathan. He first initiated it, and my namaskarams to Professor Swaminathan. Thanks. Thank you. They are doing, the organizers of Tamil Heritage Trust ரொம்ப பிரமாதமாக பண்ணுறாங்க. இது பற்றி அது ரொம்ப தேங்க்ஸ். தேங்க்யூ.
தேங்க்யூ சார். தேங்க்யூ. அடுத்து பாண்டியர்களின் குடவரை கோயில்கள் திரு கோபு. ஆக்சுவலாக சைவம், வைணவம், சமணம், பௌத்தம், ஆஜ்வீகம் சொல்லிட்டு பாண்டியர்